They sold over 6 million albums. They had 2 #1 hits. They were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They were called the only band that matters. Combat Rock went platinum, selling over 2 million copies. Rock the Casbah hit number 8 on the US charts. They filled stadiums with 140,000 people at the US festival. They were the sound of rebellion itself, the voice of a generation that refused to bow down. Then it all came crashing down. Heroin addiction destroyed their drummer just days before their biggest album dropped. The guitarist was fired at the peak of their success, unable to even speak to his own bandmates. Members went from brothers in arms to bitter enemies who couldn't share an elevator. A final album so terrible the band publicly disowned it. And when Joe Strummer died in 2002, just weeks after they'd finally reunited on stage, the dream of reconciliation died with him. This is the story of how the greatest punk band in history was destroyed by the very success they fought against. A tale of brotherhood wrecked by addiction, ego, and a record deal that became their prison. But to understand the collapse, we have to go back to London, 1976. London in 1976 wasn't glamorous. It was strikes, unemployment, racial tension, and rage. The pub rock scene was dying, glam was over, and something angrier was brewing in basement clubs and council estates. Rock wasn't a dream here, it was survival. For young men came together in that chaos, each one carrying their own fire. Joe Strummer, born John Graham Meller in Ankara, Turkey, the son of a diplomat, was the visionary. He'd been busking in the London underground, strumming a ukulele so roughly he adopted the name Strummer. He was singing in a pub rock band called the 101 Airs when he saw the Sex Pistols play and realized everything had to change. He had conviction, politics in his blood, and a voice like gravel and gasoline. Mick Jones was the craftsman. Born in London in 1955, raised by his grandmother on the 18th floor of a council high-rise on Harrow Road, Jones lived and breathed guitar. He'd played in the proto-punk band London SS, obsessed with sound, melody, and making something that would last. Where Strummer was raw passion, Jones was precision and ambition. Paul Simonon was the wild card, an art school kid who couldn't even play bass when he joined. Born in 1955 in London, Simonon brought visual style, attitude, and an instinct for what looked and felt right. He learned bass by playing along to reggae records, and his aesthetic vision would define the band's image as much as the music. And then there was Topper Headon, the engine. Born Nick Headon in Bromley, Kent, he was the 207th and final person to audition for the drummer position in May 1977. When he sat down and played, everything locked into place. He could play anything, punk fury, reggae swing, jazz fills, and he did it all with effortless power. Managed by Bernard Rhodes, an associate of Malcolm McLaren, the Clash weren't just another punk band. They fused punk's rage with reggae's rhythm, rockabilly's rebellion, and lyrics that actually meant something. While other bands screamed chaos, the Clash screamed clarity. They sang about riots, police brutality, unemployment, identity, things that mattered to kids rotting in council flats with no future. Their first gig was opening for the Sex Pistols. Within months, They were the talk of London's underground. Then came the break. On January 25, 1977, CBS Records offered them £100,000, a staggering sum for a band that had played maybe 30 gigs and barely any headliners. The punk world erupted. Mark Perry, founder of the fanzine Sniffin' Glue, wrote, "Punk died the day the Clash signed to CBS. Selling out to a major label? That was betrayal." But the Clash didn't see it that way. They wanted their message heard everywhere, not just in dingy clubs. Perry himself later recanted after hearing White Riot, admitting, "They're the most important group in the world at the moment." What no one knew yet, not even the band, was that this record deal wasn't salvation. It was a trap. The contract wasn't for 5 albums like they thought. It was for 13. And CBS expected the Clash to pay for everything. All recordings, all mixes, all tours. Every pound spent would come out of their pockets. The deal was later used as a textbook example of the kind of contract no group should ever sign. But even in the beginning, the seeds of destruction were already there. Their self-titled debut album dropped on April 8, 1977. Recorded in just 3 weeks for £4,000 in a cramped studio, most of it written in Mick Jones's grandmother's flat on that 18th-floor council high-rise. It was raw, furious, and uncompromising. Janie Jones, White Riot, London's Burning, and their explosive cover of Junior Murvin's reggae track, Police and Thieves. The album hit number 12 on the UK charts. Critics called it essential. Mark Perry declared, "The Clash album is like a mirror. It reflects all the shit. It shows us the truth." But beneath this triumph, CBS in America refused to release it. They called it not radio-friendly. So it became an import-only album in the States. Then something unexpected happened. It became the best-selling import album of the year in America, moving over 100,000 copies without any label support. Fans were finding the Clash on their own. By 1978, the band was touring relentlessly. Songs like Complete Control, a furious response to CBS releasing Remote Control as a single without asking them, proved they wouldn't be controlled. They were building a reputation, unpredictable, uncompromising, unstoppable. What fans didn't see was the pressure building inside. CBS kept pushing for commercial success while the band kept their ticket prices low, sometimes as cheap as £1, so working-class kids could afford to see them. They sold albums at cost. They fought the label on everything. Their value for money principles meant they were constantly in debt to CBS, drowning under the weight of their own ideals. And that's where the trouble began. Tensions were rising. Topper Headon had started using heroin. Mick Jones was becoming obsessed with production, spending hours in the studio perfecting sounds while Strummer wanted raw immediacy. Paul Simonon felt caught between them. Manager Bernard Rhodes manipulated the friction, playing members against each other to maintain control. But the real cost was building quietly. So, if you are enjoying this video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting videos. In 1979, they went into the studio with producer Guy Stevens to record what would become London Calling. Stevens was a madman genius. He'd smash chairs, throw ladders, create chaos to capture energy. The album was recorded in August and September, a sprawling double LP that exploded punk's boundaries into reggae, ska, rockabilly, jazz, New Orleans R&B, and hard rock. When London Calling dropped in December 1979, everything changed. It reached number 9 in the UK, number 27 in the US. The title track climbed to number 11, the highest any Clash single would reach in the UK before they broke up. Train in Vain, added at the last minute and not even listed on the cover, became their first US top 40 hit, peaking at number 23. The album's cover photograph by Penny Smith, Paul Simonon smashing his bass on stage in fury, became iconic. Q magazine later called it the best rock and roll photograph of all time. Rolling Stone would eventually name London Calling the best album of the 1980s. The Clash had forced CBS to sell their double album for the price of a single LP, then just £5. It was a middle finger to industry greed and a gift to their fans. London Calling has sold over 5 million copies worldwide and went platinum in the US. But beneath this triumph, the band was fracturing. Headon's heroin use was getting worse. Jones and Strummer were clashing over creative direction. Rhodes was feeding paranoia. And CBS was demanding more albums, more tours, more hits. The 13-album contract loomed like a prison sentence. In December 1980, they released Sandinista, a sprawling triple album with 36 songs ranging from dub to hip-hop to children's choruses. Again, they forced CBS to sell it cheap, £5.99, and they forfeited their royalties on the first 200,000 copies just to make it affordable. It was ambitious, messy, and divisive. Critics were split. Fans were confused. The singles, The Call Up, and The Magnificent Seven, charted modestly, number 40 and 34 in the UK respectively, but Sandinista felt like a band pulling apart at the seams, each member trying to prove something different. The real cost was building quietly. Their value-for-money principles meant they were still buried in debt to CBS. They'd only just started breaking even by 1982. And then came Combat Rock. Combat Rock dropped on May 14, 1982, and it was everything. Number 2 in the UK. Number 7 in the US. Over 1 million copies sold in America alone. Over 2.2 million worldwide. It was the Clash's most successful album, their most accessible, their commercial peak. Rock the Casbah, a song Topper Headon wrote the music for in one inspired session, banging out drums, then running to piano, then bass, hit number 8 on the US charts. Joe Strummer later said, "The real genius of Rock the Casbah is Topper. He banged down the drum track, then ran over to the piano and then the bass. Should I Stay or Should I Go climbed to number 17 in the UK, number 45 in the US. When it was reissued in 1991, it gave The Clash their first and only number 1 UK single, 9 years after the album dropped, 5 years after they'd broken up. On May 28, 1983, The Clash co-headlined the U.S. festival in San Bernardino, California. 140,000 people. The biggest crowd they'd ever played to. They were untouchable. They were legends. But that moment of glory was also the beginning of the end. Because while they looked unstoppable on stage, everything off stage was cracking. Topper Headon's heroin addiction had become unbearable. He was missing rehearsals, nodding off during sessions, unreliable. Joe Strummer finally confronted him. "How can I be singing anti-drug songs with you sitting behind me?" On May 10, 1982, just days before Combat Rock's release, right at the peak of their success, The Clash fired Topper Headon. They covered it up, telling the press it was exhaustion. But the truth was darker. The band's greatest drummer, the rhythmic genius who'd written their biggest hit, was gone. And they were lying about why. Terry Chimes, their original drummer, came back briefly. Then Pete Howard took over in May 1983. But it wasn't the same. The chemistry was broken. Tensions between Mick Jones, Joe Strummer, and Paul Simonon were now unbearable. After Combat Rock, Jones wanted to rest, to step back and recharge. Strummer and Simonon wanted to keep touring, keep pushing. Jones was spending endless hours in the studio, perfecting production, while Strummer thought punk should be raw and immediate. Strummer later said Jones had become intolerable to work with, claiming he wouldn't show up. When he did show up, it was like Elizabeth Taylor in a filthy mood. The personal relationship between Jones and Simonon deteriorated so completely they stopped speaking to each other. They couldn't even be in the same room. Manager Bernard Rhodes stoked the fire, whispering poison in Strummer's ear, telling him Jones was the problem, that he was holding the band back, that the Clash needed to be saved from him. September 1, 1983. The trigger. Joe Strummer fired Mick Jones from the Clash. The co-founder, the lead guitarist, the musical architect, the man who'd written or co-written most of their greatest songs. Gone. Dismissed from his own band at the absolute height of their fame. It was brutal, cold, and irreversible. Jones later admitted, "I was just carried away really, I wish I had a bit more control." But by then it didn't matter. The damage was done. Strummer and Simonon recruited two new guitarists, Nick Sheppard and Vince White. They brought in Pete Howard on drums. This wasn't the Clash anymore. This was a tribute band wearing the Clash's skin, and everyone knew it. The lowest moment came in stages. After Strummer and Simonon performed at the U.S. Festival in May 1983 with the new lineup, members of the band brawled with security staff. The chaos was visible. The unity was gone. Fans watched in confusion as the band they loved unraveled in public. Then they went to Munich in early 1985 to record what would become Cut the Crap. Manager Bernard Rhodes, now fully in control, using the pseudonym Jose Unidos as producer, fought with Strummer over every decision. The sessions were toxic. Rhodes added drum machines, cheap synths, overproduction that buried what little soul remained. When Cut the Crap was released in November 1985, it was a disaster. Critics savaged it. Fans rejected it. Even Joe Strummer and Paul Simonon publicly disowned the album around the time of its release. The single, This Is England, limped to number 24 in the UK, then disappeared. So, if you are enjoying this video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting videos. In 1986, The Clash officially disbanded. No farewell tour. No final statement. Just silence. The band that had sold over 6 million albums, that had changed punk rock forever, that had been called the only band that matters, was gone. Reduced to a humiliating final album, internal warfare, and a legacy torn apart by ego and betrayal. Joe Strummer later admitted the firing of Mick Jones was a mistake. But it was too late. Trust was shattered. The brotherhood was dead. After the collapse, everyone scattered. Mick Jones formed Big Audio Dynamite almost immediately, a band that fused rock with hip-hop, dance, and electronic music. It was successful, inventive, everything Jones wanted to explore that Strummer wouldn't let him. Bad had hits, toured the world, and gave Jones the creative freedom he'd been denied. Joe Strummer disappeared. He scored films, played solo gigs, formed the Mescaleros in the late 90s, and slowly rebuilt himself. But the shadow of the Clash followed him everywhere. Fans wanted the old band, not whatever new thing he was trying to create. Paul Simonon painted. He returned to visual art, occasionally playing bass with other bands, but mostly stayed out of the spotlight. The Clash had burned him out. Topper Headon spiraled. His heroin addiction consumed him. He was convicted of theft and assault charges, in and out of rehab, a tragic fall for the man who'd once been the greatest drummer in punk rock. By the 90s, he was broke, forgotten, and barely alive. The wounds were too deep. They didn't speak. Years passed in bitter silence. Then, in 2002, something shifted. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame announced on November 7, 2002, that the Clash would be inducted in March 2003. It was overdue, obvious, and it forced the band to confront their history. On November 15, 2002, Mick Jones and Joe Strummer shared a stage together for the first time in nearly 20 years. A benefit show in London. They performed 3 Clash songs. The energy was electric, the connection still there beneath all the hurt. Strummer wanted the Clash to play at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Maybe, just maybe, they could reconcile. But the story wasn't over. December 22, 2002. Joe Strummer died of a heart attack at his home. He was 50 years old. The cause was a defective artery near his heart, a silent killer. It had been just 5 weeks since he and Mick Jones reunited on stage. 5 weeks since the possibility of reconciliation became real. And now it was gone forever. The dream of the Clash playing together one last time died with Strummer. On March 10, 2003, Joe Strummer, Mick Jones, Paul Simonon, Terry Chimes, and Topper Headon were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Strummer wasn't there to accept it. His widow spoke in his place. The remaining members stood on stage together, awkward, grieving, unable to play. Decades later, the battle became about legacy. In 2004, Rolling Stone ranked the Clash number 28 on their list of the 100 greatest artists of all time. Their influence was undeniable. Bands from U2 to Rancid to Green Day to The Killers cited them as foundational. Every politically conscious punk band that followed owed the Clash a debt. But the personal damage was irreversible. Topper Headon eventually got clean and reconciled with the others to some degree, but he never played with them again. Mick Jones and Paul Simonon occasionally collaborated, But the magic was gone. The Clash as a living, breathing entity was finished. The tragedy wasn't just that the Clash broke up. It's that they almost made it back. That Strummer and Jones were talking again. That there was a moment, just one fragile moment in November 2002, when healing seemed possible. And then it was ripped away. The legacy war was over, but nobody won. Today, the Clash exists only as a catalog. Paul Simonon and Mick Jones have occasionally performed together in other projects. Topper Headon, now clean and reflective, gives interviews about the glory days. But the Clash will never reunite. Joe Strummer's death made sure of that. Their music endures. London Calling is still played on classic rock radio. Rock the Casbah is still a stadium anthem. Should I Stay or Should I Go is still a cultural touchstone. Over 6 million albums sold. Millions more streamed. A new generation discovers them every year. But listen closely to their story and you hear the cost of everything they fought for. They refused to compromise. They kept ticket prices low so poor kids could see them. They sold double and triple albums at single album prices. They fought their label at every turn. They tried to change the system from the inside. And the system destroyed them. The 13-album contract buried them in debt. The pressure treadmill ground them down. The success they created became a prison. The brotherhood that made them unstoppable became their battleground. Addiction took Topper. Ego took Mick. And when they finally had a chance to heal, death took Joe. This is the story of how the greatest punk band in history was destroyed by success itself, how harmony hid rot, how the system broke brotherhood, and how legends became enemies. The Clash proved you could sell millions without selling out. But they also proved that sometimes fighting the system means losing yourself. In 2013, 5 young guys formed a band in a council flat, inspired by a Clash record. They kept their ticket prices low. They refused major label pressure. They believed music could change the world. That's the Clash's real legacy. Not the chart positions or the sales figures or the awards. It's the idea, the impossible, beautiful, destructive idea, that rock and roll can mean something more than money. They lost everything proving it, and they'd probably do it all again. What part of the Clash's story hits you the most? Did you see them live? Do you think Joe Strummer and Mick Jones could have truly reunited if Strummer had lived? Drop your thoughts below. I want to hear your memories, your take on what happened, and which Clash song changed your life. Like this video if their story moved you. Subscribe for more deep dives into music history's greatest rise and fall tales. And let me know which band I should cover next. The story of legends isn't just about the music, it's about what we're willing to sacrifice for what we believe in.